When Jesus says to us in the gospel today, I am from above, you are from below, you are of this world, I am not of this world, we really see the humility of God. St. Paul talks about this in a very beautiful way in his letter to the Philippians, trying to really convey to us the humility and the love of God when he says, though he was divine, God did not cling to his equality with God as something to be grasped. No, he emptied himself to assume the form of a servant, a slave. He was humbler yet to death on a cross. Those lovely words in the gospel today touch our hearts very much. When the Son of Man is lifted up, that of course is pointing to Jesus on the cross. It's a lovely thought to have during these final days before we enter into Holy Week. So I'd like to share with you a few thoughts on the virtue of humility of heart. Humility is the path, the way which God chose to so lovingly save us. Just as pride was the vice that brought sin and death into our world, humility is the shining virtue that overcomes sin and overcomes death and restores to each one of us the fullness of everlasting life. Humility, of course, has a central and foundational place in the spiritual life. Why? Because God himself is the first one not only to teach us about humility, but to act so humbly. This is what St. Isaac the Syrian says when teaching about the virtue of humility. He says this: humility is the robe of God. The Word who became human clothed himself with humility, and he spoke with us in our human body. Humility is the virtue of Jesus. It's the virtue of Jesus. And God became man, but he didn't just become any man. When we think about it, God became man in the most helpless and fragile state in which he could possibly ever exist. As a small, tiny, vulnerable, innocent, a helpless baby, the baby Jesus. God became dependent upon man for even the simplest of things. Without our Blessed Lady and Saint Joseph, the small child Jesus could do nothing for himself. Jesus was laid, as we know, in the manger in Bethlehem because there was no room for him. No room for him in the homes around. But I think that Jesus was born in the manger not because he could not surely have touched the heart of one of the men or women round about Bethlehem to open wide their doors to him. He did it because he wanted to teach us something very beautiful, very attractive. He wanted to show us that Humility can open doors that power never can. Humility is more powerful than pride, just as the light is always more radiant than the darkness of the night. And love is more victorious than our sins. Humility, when we think about it, is not complicated. It's simply acknowledging the truth, the reality of things. It's acknowledging that all that we have, all that we are, all that we hope or aspire to be, is a gift of God's grace to us. May we never be afraid to be humble. Never. Because this is not something that will ever humiliate us or demean us. That's not the way of our God. No, it will set us truly free to love, to be humble in the image of God who is humility. And you know, as we grow, and it is a struggle for all of us, it's a journey, but as we grow little by little in the virtue of humility, we will become just like Jesus. That's what he wants for us, really. We will become like him, and we'll become like the humble poor lady of Nazareth, the Blessed Mother. What could possibly be more pleasing to God than to see in each one of us a real desire to cultivate the virtue of a humble, dependent heart? Now, of course, Christmas is a beautiful manifestation of this, because Christmas is an act of our loving Father by which he gives us his very self, his love. During this time, may each one of us acquire a humble heart and make that humility a gift to God. May humility of heart draw all families together in a lovely communion of love and kindness, fulfilling those wonderful words of St. Paul also to the Philippians when he says this: do nothing out of selfish ambition or a vain conceit. No, rather in humility value others above yourselves, not looking only to your own interests, but each of you look to the interests of others. St. Clare of Assisi used to love to sit before the crucifix, just like St. Francis, and to gaze upon the face of Jesus, to gaze upon this icon of humility. And she used to say this to the sisters: when you're sitting before Jesus and contemplating the crucifix, look at him, gaze upon him, consider who he is, think about him, contemplate him, converse with him, speak with him, be intimate with him. She said, as we desire to imitate him in our lives, in our very ordinary day-to-day lives, may we place our minds and hearts always before him. He who is the mirror of eternity. Let's place our souls, she says, before the brilliance of his glory. And let's place our hearts in the figure of divine love. Lovely, lovely words. And she says, let's allow our whole being to be transformed into the image of Jesus himself. Through prayer, through contemplation, through developing this friendship with Jesus, who is our friend, so that we may feel what his friends feel as they taste the sweetness which God himself has reserved from the beginning for those who have a desire to love him. May God grant all of us this grace, this gift of poverty of heart, this gift of humility, which will empty us, if we are open, will empty us of everything but the simplicity of a gaze fixed upon the beautiful face of Christ. The humility of Christmas is the humility of every day. It's the humility that carries us out of ourselves, out of the darkness of pride, and it brings us into the light of Jesus. Jesus says to each one of us, I think today, I love you so, so much that I humble myself before you. May we love God tenderly in the words of the prophet Hosea. May we love him tenderly, always act justly, and may we walk humbly with our God and with the humble Virgin. Amen.